favourite subject or least favourite subject?
Emotions.
I've got emotion that's driving me over. Okay, a bit hard to get to these high registers of the Bee Gees, but anyway. So we thought we'd start off the afternoon. We want to do two things this afternoon. One is we'd like to talk a little bit more about the higher principles. We haven't got to the highest ones yet, have we? So, and I don't know whether we're going to be able to, because tomorrow we are thinking we might do some mediumship as well.
We
tomorrow,
thought maybe like a spirit day where you can, we'll do some mediumship, but ask any questions you have about spirit influence, spirits, anything like that. Yeah.
And maybe even channel some of our spirit friends where you can ask them some questions. Yeah. So today it means we've only got really 2 and a bit hours left, haven't we? So we'll probably try to get through this quickly. Because we do want to, I just want to, at the end of the day, talk about awareness versus awakening. Those two different things. And, to do that, we're going to have to terminate the discussion about emotion and other things a bit short. But let's talk about the sin of controlling emotion. Seems innocent enough, doesn't it? Seems innocent enough. Okay. So why is that a sin, do you think?
We've come so far to not know this.
Maybe if I go at the back. Yeah, thank you. And then across. Okay.
Because God designed us to be fully expressive of everything we're feeling.
Yeah, so let's look at the design of the soul for a moment, shall we? So the human soul, and we're talking now about the entire soul, which includes its two halves. So what God designed is that emotion is the way that the soul experiences almost every experience. In fact, emotion is like the brain of your soul. It's like the intellect of your soul. So it's not only that, it also includes sensory apparatus as well. So there are senses that the soul has, of which the senses of your physical body are a subset. So an example of that is in your physical body, you have the ability to see, but you only can see in a visible spectrum. The visible spectrum is the frequencies of light between infrared and ultraviolet, and they are the visible spectrum that your eyes have been designed to see. Your spirit body has the same sense of sight, but it has a wider visible spectrum. So you can see colours that are infrared and ultraviolet. And in those areas of light, there are far more colours. So you know how all of our colours on Earth are sort of a mixture of infrared to ultraviolet colours? And so in the spirit world, all the colours are a mixture of the wider range of frequencies. So when you enter the spirit world, you will actually start seeing colours that you've never seen before. And you couldn't see anyway with your physical body because your eyes don't have the capability of seeing those spectrums of light. The same applies to your hearing, actually. So in your physical form, your senses of hearing are able to hear sounds from around like 50 or 60 hertz, which is cycles per second, up to, well, if you've got really good hearing, maybe 20 kilohertz if you're lucky. But most people's hearing is quite damaged on Earth through different things, oftentimes the machinery we use, and as a result, or too many parties, too much loud music or whatever, and oftentimes our frequency spectrum that we can actually hear is 100 hertz to around 16 kilohertz or thereabouts. And in fact, that's why they've designed phone systems in the old days, used to have been designed to only transmit between 100 hertz and 5 kilohertz, because that's where most of the voice appears. So your sense of hearing in your physical body is controlled by the ability of your ocular senses to actually to hear certain frequencies, and your eardrum has been designed to only vibrate in harmony with those frequencies and therefore transmit electrical signals to your brain based on those frequencies. And so the hearing you have is limited in that spectrum of frequencies. In your spirit body, you can actually hear sounds right down to 0 cycles per second and right up way beyond what a dog could hear on Earth, and right up beyond that actually to over 200,000 kilohertz, and your entire hearing apparatus has improved. But not only that, you're able to hear sounds from long distances as well, not short distances. So at the moment we have quite a few million spirits here with us, and they are like seated in a huge amphitheatre around us, and some of them are more than half a kilometre away and they can still hear us. Does that make sense? So in terms of distance, if you could think of it that way. So the spirit body has the capability of tuning in also to specific sounds and zoning out other ones, which you have to a degree, don't you? You notice that. Like one time I remember going to Barbados, and I was sitting down with a friend there, and the cricket noise was so loud that initially I couldn't hear anybody speaking. But eventually, after a few days, I got used to the cricket noise so much that I could almost zone it out, and I could hear clearly what everybody was saying. But right the very first few days that I went, it was very confusing, because it was like, what are you saying? What are you saying? You had to get right up close to them, and I couldn't zone it out. But your body has the ability to zone out frequencies in preference to other frequencies, and you can do that a lot more powerfully in your spirit body. Now, your soul senses is exponentially better than that as well. So you can see with your soul, you can actually project a sight from a location that's light years away and see what's happening light years away from you. Whereas in your spirit body, you can't do that. You have to be quite close. And when I say quite close, you have to be within about what you would classify here as about 2,000 kilometres before you lose your sight, your ability to see detail. Here on Earth, and when it comes to how far you can see, you can only see most people, if you stand on top of a mountain or something, you might be able to see 20 or 30 kilometres, but not a lot of detail by the time you get to the end of that. Well, in your spirit body, you can see around 2,000 kilometres, and then in your soul, depending on its development in love, you can see light years away. You can see things from light years away. So every capacity that you experience in your physical body, there is a superset of that capacity in the higher body, if you like. So the spirit body has a higher set of capacities. So those senses form a large part of your ability to feel and to experience life, to have experiences. And those experiences enter through your senses, but they trigger emotions in you, feelings in you. So you could say the sensory apparatus of your spirit body, of your soul, are these heightened senses in addition to a set of heightened emotions, right? And depending on your development of love again, your ability to experience emotion and the capacity to experience emotion grows. So when you're in the first sphere, you have a very limited set of emotions you can actually experience and actually be sensitive to. those emotions are primarily fear, anger, resentment, those hatred, those kind of emotions. Very insensitive to love when you're in the first sphere. And then as you grow through the spheres, you'll find you become sensitive to the nuances of other emotions because you drop off the emotions that are more unloving. And as you do that, you become far more sensitive to the nuances of the emotions that are loving. And so you start to be able to tell the difference between compassion and gratitude, between admiration and respect, between, different forms of emotions that honour and respect. You can feel the difference between those emotions because you become more sensitive to them as you grow. And that's because the soul, as it grows in love, it has a growing capacity to experience emotion. And in fact, the way in which you store your memories is these are stored only because emotions are stored. And so what happens a lot of the times, it's the things that we refuse to feel completely are the things that we end up remembering and trying to forget. So those kind of things are traumatic events, for example. So what happens a lot is we refuse to feel the traumatic event completely. That event gets stored emotionally in the soul. It has an intellectual memory-based signature, which includes all of the memories of the experience, includes the smell of the experience, the taste of the experience, the sight, the hearing of the experience, everything. All the sensory apparatus are all combined in a part of the memory. And then when that memory is combined, what happens is that you have an emotional part of that memory as well. And then and when you experience an emotion fully, the memory is like a picture that sort of doesn't involve you anymore. But before then, the memory is a picture that you're fully emotionally imbibing. And when I say the memories that don't involve you anymore, I mean the traumatic ones that I've just referred to. When you feel them fully, you can remember an event intellectually, but you no longer have any emotional connection to the event at all. Right? You get to that stage. Now, a lot of spirits in the sixth sphere or lower spheres really try to mimic that stage by trying to deny their experiences, but of course they can't do that. So because the soul itself has been designed to have emotions pass through it, and not only through it, through your half, but also it's been designed to have emotions pass through and circulate both halves of the soul. So in other words, I have a feeling, Mary is able to feel the feeling as soon as I feel the feeling, right? And then she has a feeling, I'm able to feel her feeling as soon as she feels her feeling. You follow? So it's one soul that has this ability. And the more separated we are in terms of awareness, the less we have that ability. But you will have the ability in the future to instantly be aware of all of the feelings of the other half of your soul. And that ability begins in a lot more strength in the 8th sphere of the spirit world. And by the time you enter the union state, which is the 36th sphere of the spirit world, that is now seamless. It's like there's no gap at all. Whatever thought Mary has, I have. Whatever feeling Mary has, I have. We don't even see ourselves as Jesus and Mary anymore. We're like jam. Jesus and Mary, right? And we're together. I don't know what other, or Madge, I could say she's Mary and Jesus. But you sort of, everything happens seamlessly in that condition where everything passing through you passes through the other instantly. And in that place, you can have hundreds of bodies and they are all having experiences. You're talking to people. So we have hundreds of bodies talking to people right at this moment in different places of the spirit world. And every one of them gets processed by the soul, and every one of those bodies knows what is happening in the other bodies at the same time. So you end up in this state where you can have multiple interactions with multiple people. Your soul is controlling all of that, and you can also create and discard bodies at any time. You can create them and discard them. And there's only two bodies that we don't discard. One is our original body on earth that we had. So the Jesus body and the Mary Magdalene body, they are still in their original, not original state, but in a different state, but they're still there, that we haven't discarded in the spirit world, that we meet with people. And of course, the two bodies we now are connected to as well. So, but these are the capacities of your soul as your soul grows. Now, all of those capacities are based upon how much information you can process at any one point of time. And that information is dependent upon how much love you've received from God, how much you've grown, and also how much emotional capacity you have to cope with it all. You know, you need to have, you need to be able to get to a stage where you can handle large amounts of very complicated emotions from all sorts of sources and understand and where they're coming from and what's going on with them, as well as what's going inside of yourself. And that is how the soul's been designed, to grow with God's love. Now, a person in the sixth sphere can't do those things. So perfect natural man can do a subset of those things, but can't do all the things I've just mentioned. But that's the capacity of the soul in a union state versus the, say, sixth sphere state versus what state many of us experience on Earth. Does that make sense to you? Now, I know that's just a very quick technical overview, and at some point in the future, we might discuss that in a lot more detail. But what I'm saying is how important it is to understand the importance of tuning into your senses and tuning into your emotions is. Now, when I say tuning into your senses, what I mean there is, you know, you have the sense of touch. That is a sense you can tune into or zone out of, right? When you tune into it, you'll be very sensitive to the slightest of touch. You will get to the stage where just a small breeze, you can feel it. You can actually you get to a point eventually in the soul where you can feel when other people have touched your spirit body or even just gone to touch your spirit body. You can actually feel people's intention to do it rather than even just what they do. And the senses become so sensitive that you can feel what is not only going on at a physical level, but also at an emotional level, spiritual level, the intentions. And in addition to that, you get so sensitive that you can absorb that information from thousands of sources all at the same time, right? But to do that, there needs to be a growing in the connection to your senses. So, you know, when people have an accident, and they say they didn't feel it, and they think that's a good thing, well, it's not actually a good thing. It's detuning from your senses, right? God desires you experience your senses to a greater degree so that you can enjoy them, right? And this includes all your senses, including your sexual senses, all the emotions that are a part of your senses. You've also got all of your normal senses of your body, sight, taste, hearing, all those senses. And all of these senses grow in capacity as you grow in love. Now, if this is the way in which in the end, the soul's brain works this way, like the signature of who you are is going to be all about what interacts emotionally with your personality and your nature, and how you then choose to exercise your senses and in what direction you use them. That is going to determine the joy of your future to a large degree. And in that place, you can imagine that if you're shutting down things emotionally, pushing them under, you are now inhibiting your soul's ability to grow in this regard. So your soul's been designed to feel feelings. It's one of its primary goals of design, because without feeling feelings, you're not going to be able to enjoy anything. So you need to be able to feel feelings to enjoy things. The problem that many of us face is that due to sin and the actions of others, usually in our childhood and everything, we've learnt to shut down our senses so much that the only things we can enjoy are things that are very much in our face, like forcefully delivered and stark in nature. And what I mean by that is, you have to have, you can't just feel enjoyment of a day unless there's a pretty scene around you first. You can't feel the enjoyment of a food unless the flavour is so strong that it almost burns your mouth. And nowadays you can see even manufacturers know this. They are making foods now that have got so strong in flavours because the average person can't feel the nuances of flavour anymore, and because of different things that are happening in our body, and we've detuned from different things so much. So the flavours have to be very strong and very determined flavours before we can taste them or smell them and sense them. And this is all because the emotional part of us is shutting down. It's been taught to shut down from childhood, and we're just shutting down further. Right? So that's how the soul works. Brief summary. Right? Obviously, a lot more to understand about that. Mary and I have spent 2,000 years examining how the soul works for lots of reasons, because it is the pinnacle of God's creation, and it is a key to understanding yourself. Right? But what I'm trying to illustrate from that discussion is that controlling emotion is one of the most damaging things you can do to your own soul. And you not only damage yourself, but you also damage your soulmate while you're doing it. Right? So you're not just damaging, like if I shut down my emotion, I'm not only just damaging me, but I'm also damaging Mary. Because her ability to share emotion with me now is going to be severely impacted by my inability to feel the same emotion. So if Mary feels a feeling of love for me, and I am desensitized to those feelings, I am preventing her from ever expressing her real feelings towards me because I am unable to receive them. Now, many of you know that's what happens in a relationship, right? There are times when the other party in your relationship can't feel what you're feeling, can't understand what you're thinking, those kind of things. God designed the soul so that you would instantly know and feel what the other person's thinking and feeling at any point of time. Right? So Mary doesn't have to tell me what her feelings are. Right? So there's no need for conversation about Mary's feelings or my feelings. If Mary can feel my feelings and I can feel hers, we don't need to talk about feelings, we're having them. So we don't need to talk about them anymore. You follow? Yeah. If you shut down that, now, to understand Mary, I'm going to have to talk. Right? I'm going to have to ask her questions. What do you feel about this? And what do you feel about that? And I noticed you reacted this way. Why did you react that way? I'm confused. Why did you do that? What feelings do you have? What caused you to react that way? I don't understand. Why did you get upset then when, all of those questions are going to be necessary if I can't feel her. But if I can feel her, none of them are necessary. Make sense? So can you see controlling emotion? Huge problem for your soul. And that's why it's classified from God's perspective as a sin. Now, what's the result of the sin? Well, the result of the sin is that you have a restricted capacity to understand and feel anything going on in your environment. That's the penalty. The more you shut down your soul, the more restriction there is on everything in terms of all of your senses, all of your thoughts are tainted now by the shutdown. Like every single thing is tainted in one way or another as soon as you do it. That's the penalty. So you could say the penalty of the sin is almost walking through the world and life unaware of what's going on around you unless people are in your face telling you what's going on. So what that then requires is that if someone is upset with you, if you're in this state, you'll be aware of every person who's upset with you. Now, for me at the moment on earth, that's a lot of people, right? And it's sometimes hard to deal with, having all that negative emotion coming at you, but it's far better to stay open to it than it is to close down to it, because at least I'm aware. I know who's safe to deal with, who isn't safe to deal with. Someone who comes to interview us, I know what their intentions are. I know why they've come to interview me. I can determine all that. Somebody comes to one of our groups, I know what their intention is going to be, how they'll exercise that intention. There's nothing that's really a surprise anymore, right? And the only things that are really surprises is when people work in disharmony with their intention. And that sometimes happens, where somebody exercises their will completely differently to how their whole system believes they should act. And then it's a lovely surprise, sometimes in a bad or a good direction, but it's still a surprise. But it's a rare thing, because when you're sensitive to these things, you can see everything going on. And the soul sees these things as almost like a sight. It's like it sees them happening and can describe it in infinite almost detail. The wonder of it is it's so amazing. And so when you start experiencing these things, which all of you hopefully will have the joy of experiencing at some point, when you start experiencing these things, you start realizing how almost dead you were before, and the soul can be suppressed by controlled emotion so much that it becomes almost like it's dead. Like none of these senses work. None of those abilities are present. And this is what it's like for many people who arrive in the hells of the spirit world. They sort of feel they have dead souls because they don't have any of these senses working, and they can see other people do. And then they realize, oh, what's happened to mine? I don't understand. And it's all often because it began with controlling emotion. All right? So let's... On the chin.
Yesterday, right before I met you, I was controlling my emotion. I was in line. There was one woman ahead of me, and I knew I was getting close to meeting you, and I started shaking internally.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was going to cry,
Yeah.
but I shut it down.
Yeah.
When I got to you, I didn't know how to respond, so that control then
Changes the experience.
changed everything,
Yeah.
because
That's right.
then I reached out my hand to you, Mary. I didn't know what to do. Should I hug her? Should I?
Well, by this stage, you're not interested in hugging the person, are you, anymore? It's like,
Right. It was.
let's shake their hand.
It felt totally different than like a moment prior.
Yeah.
If I had just allowed the emotion, been honest with you, wow, I'm really feeling emotional right now.
You don't
You don't
even
even have
need to
to
be
say
honest
that.
with the other person.
Oh,
You
Just-
just need to be honest with yourself.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
And
and you need
be-
to accept
be-
it in yourself.
Yeah, and just be how you are.
Yeah.
You never need to apologize or explain your emotions to people, If you're having them for yourself, not projecting them, then that's you being you, in that moment.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you don't have to explain them or anything. You got to learn to be them.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Up the back, Sarah, and then down to Lisa on this side. Yeah. Just around there.
But when you're feeling your emotions, oftentimes it makes other people uncomfortable.
Who cares?
And so but then what's your response if you just want to be with your emotions? And like I'm thinking about just today, I was in my emotions a lot today, and a lot of people were coming to ask me if I was okay.
Yeah, they don't need to.
Yeah.
A lot of times what happens is other people see you feeling an emotion which distresses them, and then they react in a way trying to cheer you up so that they're not distressed anymore. There's a lot of selfishness in that. That's when somebody's truly feeling an emotion, and like if I can feel you truly feeling emotion, I'm not going to interfere. If I feel you need some help because you're feeling something that's not real, then I might say something. But for the most part, I won't interfere because you have the capacity to feel your emotion, and you don't need to share it with anyone else.
Because we do this a lot with our children.
We do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. How are you? Are you going all right? What's wrong?
Oh, you don't need to. You're okay.
Yeah.
You're all
You're
right.
calming down, all
Yeah.
sorts of things. A lot of this controlled emotion begins in childhood because the parents are trying to suppress their children's emotion because the parents get distressed about a child's distress.
Yes.
But that's all because we don't cope with our own feelings, and so we're worried when our children need to cope with theirs. Does that make sense?
The biggest gift you can give your kids is, firstly, you feel confident to cope with your feelings, because then they won't feel any anxiety from you when they're feeling, but also to educate them that they can feel emotion. They're capable. They're completely capable. And if they want to come and talk to you afterwards about, what it was about or what they learned or is there questions, that's a great time to do it. But to interfere with when they're feeling a feeling, that's very much about the parent.
Part of educating a child is getting them to the stage where by the time they're 7, hopefully, but definitely by the time they're an adult, they can cope with any emotion. They can cope with being attacked. They can cope with being abused. They can cope with being praised without going into aren't I fantastic? And in other words, arrogance, and also pulled down without going into I'm worthless. They can cope with all that. They can handle anything. And when you're in that state where you can handle anything, that's when you can be pretty happy.
You can see how you can be yourself then, can't you?
Yeah.
Because you're not reliant on how everyone's going to respond to me. I'm just going to be me. And if I've got a good character, some morality that has been I've been educated about how to be a good moral person, I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to be really a force to be a loving force to be reckoned
Loving
with.
force, yeah.
Because I'm going to be being myself. I'm not going to be invested in how everyone's going to treat me. And I'm going to treat people really well. And I'm going to take action. Yeah.
What if there's an emotion that you know is causing a disease in a child?
Well, every disease in a child is generally caused by either parents or grandparents or spirits that are parental, usually connecting with the child in some way, in a destructive manner. So let's say the child has leukemia. Well, that is usually a grandparent or a great-grandparent who probably died from the same sickness, who's connected to the energetic systems of the child, trying to help the child, and that's usually what causes it. So again, if the child is capable of feeling its own feelings, it would recognise, granny is with me or great-granny is with me, and it's not good, and they'd be able to do something about that. When it comes to a lot of childhood sicknesses and diseases, a lot of it's in response to the parent's suppression. So parents need to look at how much they're suppressing the child, how much they're trying to control the child's emotion, how much they're trying to cheer up the child, how much they're trying to stop the child from feeling its grief. All of those kind of things have a large effect on the disease systems that are caused in the body, which is caused by the child feeling that the parents want it to suppress itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If a parent feels, I can't cope with my grief, what does the child feel? I can't cope with my grief. They might be prone then to asthma.
Or I need my parent to cope with my grief.
Yes. Yeah. All those things.
Yeah.
And then as your child is getting older, obviously they're accruing their own condition now, their own emotions.
Their own sin.
And sometimes you can see, wow, that's my emotion that now my child has got.
Yeah.
But the worst thing you can do is then tell the child that they can't feel that emotion. The best thing is for both of you to feel it.
Yeah.
Then how do you teach your child then to feel that emotion?
Firstly, by you doing it.
You've got to do it first. Otherwise, you're a hypocrite. Aren't
Otherwise,
you?
you're a hypocrite, right? Yeah. The child is more sensitive to feeling its emotion than you are. And the reason why that is quite obvious. Obviously, the child has had less suppression, probably, particularly if it's your own child. It's probably had less suppression than you have had in your own childhood, perhaps. Or by the time you're an adult, you've already suppressed quite a lot, generally. And so the child being a child is suppressed less. And so it's more prone to be its feelings being enabled as long as you haven't fed its addiction to avoid. Right? Now, this is where a lot of parents go wrong because they feed their child's addiction to avoid hard emotions. And then, of course, also parents have a very stoic attitude generally to the emotion of the child because you're worried that you're being a bad parent if your child's feeling something. And as a result of those things, the child gets very suppressed, and that can exhibit itself in disease or rage or even suicide and other emotions as a result of that. So So the key is to make sure as a parent that you're never, ever, you're teaching the child how to have emotion without teaching the child how to control it. Now, when I say control it, I don't mean that they are allowed to go into a rage and beat you up, right? Because that's not just uncontrolled emotion. That is now blaming someone else for an emotion. Do you see the difference? So when we talk about letting your emotions be uncontrolled, we're not saying you can blame other people for your emotions. See, let's say I'm angry, and let's say I'm angry with my partner. If I hit Mary in that rage, or even yell at her in that rage, right? I am now being unloving to her, and I'm also not feeling my real emotion. My real emotion is sadness, and I'm unwilling to experience it, and I'm blaming her for it, right? So my real emotion is sadness. That's the emotion that I'm stressed out or fearful of feeling, and then I blame her, and then I take it out on her. So there's a whole unloving process that goes on between you having your own emotion and then taking your emotion out on someone else, right? There is never a reason for taking your emotion out on someone else. Never a reason.
So that's part of your education as a parent, is to educate your child about that as well.
So if your child's screaming at you, they're out of line. There's never a reason for a child to scream at you, right? They need to learn how to experience their own emotion. Now, the only caveat I would put with that is, have you done some really bad things to your child? And if that's the case, I'd let my child scream at me. You know, let them have and admit, yes, I did those wrong things, you know. Let yourself have those admissions. But if they're just yelling and screaming at you because they want an addiction met, like they want you to take them to basketball or something and you won't do it, or they want to visit your friend for a weekend and you won't do it, and they're yelling at you about it, then obviously they're way out of line. Yeah? And the child needs to learn how to have its emotion without damaging anyone else in the family, including you. And this is what you teach them. They need to learn how to cope with their emotions to the point where any emotion that they have, they're able to experience without blaming another person for it. Yeah. Yep. Lisa?
So now I have two because
Sorry,
I have two questions now because one's kind of
you had one before and two now. Is that what you're saying? There is.
So the first one that's related to Sarah's was when I first started listening to Divine Truth, I wanted to let my kids have their emotions. So I would tell them, you need to have your emotions, but I wasn't doing that. Right?
Yeah.
So what I feel like what that's done is shut them down more.
Of course, it not only does it shut them down more, hypocrisy, which is what that is, has an effect on the people around you emotionally. Mm-hmm. When a person is doing something or saying something that they do not do, it creates a stronger rage in the person who they're talking to actually resist doing what they say. Right? And this is an interesting dynamic that occurs emotionally. And children are very sensitive to it because they're more sensitive to emotionally to the hypocrisy than an adult is. An adult will put up with your hypocrisy generally, but a child won't generally put up with it. They'll feel it and then they will have a reaction. And the reaction is usually one of two reactions. If they feel they can't express to you that you're being a hypocrite, then they'll just go quiet, but they won't do what you want. And then if they feel they can express to you that you're a hypocrite, they'll damn well say that to you. You know, like they'll make you know it, and they'll express that. And of course you would have to admit, wouldn't you, that you are. And so yes, when you're helping a child after you've learnt truth, and many of you are in the position, aren't you, where you've got children who are growing now, and you hear truth for the very first time, and you go, wow, look at what's happened in what I've taught my children, and that's understandable. Then what you need to learn how to do is to let them have the feelings they have without you trying to control their feelings in any way, including trying to get them to have it.
Yeah, well, that's happened in the last few years. Now that's shifted, and I can see that they're having their more feelings, and it's a little bit different. And I
Correct.
also noticed that their friends who had actually more controlling
Parents.
were more emotional. Like they were even.
Correct. And
Yeah.
also because their friends have a large influence on your children.
Yeah.
So if the children's friends are able to, if your children are able to feel and experience their own emotion, any friends that they have that are sincere friends will feel more inclined to feel their emotions too. Just because of the influence that they have on each other.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And they'll also feel it as a relief.
Yeah.
See, most children feel feeling emotions is a relief. Most adults feel feeling emotions is a trauma,
Yeah.
right? So because of that problem, you got parents feeling emotions is a trauma, children feeling emotions is a relief. Already there's a lot of opposition between parents and children about emotion under those states. Now, what a lot of parents do is through their attitude and their teachings and their general spiritual beliefs and so forth, slowly the child, by the time the child becomes an adult, many times the child approaches the same stoic attitude of the parent. You follow? And you'll see this happening over years sometimes. And sometimes it can take like 40 years. And eventually the child becomes similarly as stoic as the parent. You follow? And it might have taken that long for that to occur. And a lot of that is because the child obviously brought up in that environment doesn't have any confidence in its own ability to cope with its own emotion without there being some external agreement to it feeling that emotion, right? And this is a very dangerous thing for you in your life and your children in their life. If you cannot handle your own emotion, you are going to become dependent upon other people very rapidly. You're going to end up, listening to gurus, and you're going to end up, being misled by people who say, I can help you avoid your emotion this way, and I can help you avoid it that way. And you can also be misled by things like drugs and alcohol and all of those things as methods to avoid emotion. Because if you don't believe and feel confident within yourself that you can handle yourself, then you end up looking for substances and people to handle things for you. And you'll actually interpret, like if Mary comes along, let's say I can't handle grief, and Mary comes along and she feels all this commiseration for my grief because she grew up with a dad who was full of grief and he couldn't feel it, and she has all this commiseration for my grief as a male, I'm going to feel she's my partner, she's wonderful, right? So now I become dependent on Mary for me to feel grief.
Yeah.
Very dangerous. I need to be able to feel grief for myself, right? Mary needs to be able to feel it for herself. And then when we come together, it won't be like a commiserating emotional response. And also attraction won't be bound by the commiseration. It'll be bound by deeper things about personality and nature instead. A lot of attraction that happens on earth happens just because of there being what I would call dependent emotions. I'm dependent, I can't handle my grief, but Mary feels sorry for me about it. And I think, she's wonderful for feeling sorry for me about this.
She's the only woman who really loves me.
She's the only woman who really understands me, right? That kind of feeling. And then I feel attracted to her. And even sexually, I will sexually open up towards a woman who has that feeling towards me, right? If I'm in that state where I'm avoiding my own grief, and a woman's in that state where she wants to help a man with his grief, I will feel very sexually attracted to that woman as a result, right? None of it's real. That's all.
And that's the sin, right? Like this is where how the emotion becomes like the controlling of your emotion is just so harmful in so many ways.
Yeah, it affects your life now. It affects your relationships right now. All of your friendships right now.
It affects your physical body.
Affects your
now,
physical body
your
right
personal
now,
happiness.
and it affects your future.
Yeah. And your
the-
kids' future.
Yeah. The future of people around you are going to be affected by it as well.
Yeah.
Particularly anybody who looks at you as an authority. So your children, for example, if you're at work and you're in a position of power at work, like responsibility, anybody looking up to you will be affected by it. It affects so many different areas. in most friendships, there's a level of
Pecking order.
pecking order in most friendships. Anybody who's in the position of power in the friendship who also, feels bad about feeling emotion, feels attacking about emotion, feels condescending about emotion, ridiculing about emotion, will have a huge effect on every other ones of their friends who look up to them.
Yeah.
It affects so many different things. Yeah.
And on that, the controlling emotions, for me, I feel like a lot of my emotions come out at night. Like I usually feel them, not like yesterday, I could feel there was something.
Yep.
But it wasn't until sort of I prayed and I wake up in the middle of the night and I go, oh, there it is. And then I feel it. Is that controlling emotion or is that?
Yeah, it's an example of during the day, most of us feel that we're not in the position or safety, in enough safety to actually feel our emotions constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So what we do is we bottle up the emotion for the day, and then when we have a private time, some of us who are a bit more connected will have a private time, and then you'll say, right, now you're allowed to feel it. Mm-hmm. And then, but the trouble with that is you've already bottled up some. Yeah. And it's unlikely you're going to get to the bottom of it in that moment because you've already bottled it up. You've already learnt to suppress it under certain circumstances. What the goal is, when you become at one with God, you don't ever bottle up any emotion. Every emotion is experienced as it happens. There is no restriction on what you say and what you do. Of course, when you're at one with God, you're loving, and so everything you say and do is going to be fine, right? It's going to be loving. But that's the place you're aiming for. The place you're aiming for is you've got to be real about everything you feel in the moment you feel it. Yeah. Now, you can see society is very against that as an idea or concept on earth. In celestial society is very for that. That's one reason why the celestial spirit world is so beautiful. But on earth, it's very against that. And in fact, most places that are governed by sin are against this process of expressing any emotion other than anger, fear, resentment, hatred, shame, these kind of emotions. Other than that, most people are against expressing any emotion as it happens.
Even happiness, if you think about it.
Even
if
happiness.
you're too happy, people are...
People get very jealous on earth about somebody being too happy and very angry, and the average person will project a lot of rage at that person who's happy. And also on earth, people project very strongly if you have any level of self-confidence. They project a lot of very angry emotions about a person who has any level of self-awareness or self-confidence. And so they get very angry about that as well. And so there's a lot of methods on earth used to control a person who sort of exceeds the boundaries of what emotions are socially acceptable. Yeah. Yep. Good day. If we come over there and then there and there.
Does feeling emotion always equals crying necessarily? Or because sometimes I feel like I process stuff, but I might just be laying in the dirt for 1 hour and like staring at the sky and like feeling like a mess and having like maybe like, I don't know, like sometimes I feel like convulsion almost. And I'm like, and then I kick stuff and then but then sometimes I don't have like the real grief, but I feel like I've done something. Is it possible?
Well, every emotion is designed by God to be felt completely. Yeah. So if you're sad, naturally you'll be crying. Yeah. So when I say sad, I mean grief or terrible. What's the word we can use to describe sort of the depths of despair? Yeah, right? You're going to be crying. There's going to be times when you have that. There's also going to be times when you feel ashamed and other emotions, but those kind of emotions are fear-based emotions, so you're going to have to go through fear as well as something else to feel that. So an example of shame is like, let's say, when I was young and I engaged in some sexual play with, a neighbour or something like that, and we're both the same age or a similar age, and somebody found us doing it and really shamed us for it, like mum found us and then shamed us for it, then you'll probably have some sexual shame to deal with. Now, the sexual shame will have a layer of terror over it, which is the attack coming from your mother, the terror of that attack, and the withdrawal of love in that moment. And then underneath that will be some grief about how that's affected your life. So how you experience your emotions is going to depend upon what emotion it is. In, I think it was England, just recently, I talked about the process I went through to become, in this life, because in this life I was shut down. Like by the time I was 33, I was pretty shut down. I didn't really know what any emotion really was, and I pretty much used my intellect to dominate my entire life by that stage. And I just started going through the process of emotionally awakening when I was 33. And one of the things that I did was I found a site on the internet called the Centre for Nonviolent Communication or something, and I don't recommend following its advice. But in there was a page I found about emotions and I had a page of all these different emotions listed, and describing emotions that they classified as positive, and then emotions they classified as negative. And in finding that, it was very helpful for me. The rest of it wasn't helpful at all, because they talk about, hiding emotion when you're communicating with others, which is not what God recommends at all. But in the emotion list, there were words, single words that were used to describe specific emotions, right? And what I found was that I didn't know what any of them meant, what they felt like, right? So what I did is I kept this page with me. I laminated it actually, and kept it with me. And any time I had any feelings at all, I started to try to educate myself about what word described that feeling. Does that make sense? So I could put words to the feelings, because I'd been so detuned by that stage that I couldn't put words to any feelings. Like I didn't know the difference between despair and grief, for example. I didn't know the difference between happiness and joy. I didn't understand, what these words really meant in terms of a feeling meaning. I knew the word. You could look it up in the dictionary and it says whatever, right? So I could do all of that, but that didn't help me very much because I wasn't in tune emotionally. So what it did for me was, by having those feelings there, I started practicing what it felt like to feel those feelings. Does that make sense to you? Just as a way of trying to open up to practice tuning into what that meaning of that word felt like as a feeling. And in doing that, it helped me open up a lot to different feelings that I didn't know or understand before then. You follow? And I'd recommend that most of you do that, because most of you have been quite shut down in different ways from childhood, and particularly if you're men, actually, you're going to find probably the need to do that even more than a woman, because women are generally allowed to have emotion more than men are on earth. And even many of you women don't like your men having emotion, right? You feel quite unsafe when they have emotion, when they feel some grief or some anger or shame or whatever. You feel like, oh no, the man who's providing my physical security and safety is now having an emotion. What's going to happen now? Like, there's a whole lot of things linked into that. And so most people do not understand that towards a man, there is often a lot more restriction. And this is why men revert to rage and then violence more than a woman generally would. A woman generally has an outlet with her friends to talk about their feelings, at least, whereas a man generally does not have that even with his friends, right? Because it's viewed as a competition with with friends most of the time. And so most men in particular are very detuned to even knowing what emotions are, let alone being able to feel them and describe them, right? So I'd recommend you do that for yourself as a way of trying to open up to what the feelings are.
Practicing emotions, yeah, because that's true. Like, I often have no words or no any way to describe things,
Yeah.
and I don't really know what they mean either.
Yeah. And it's not
yeah.
until you completely release emotion generally that you can even describe what they were.
Yeah.
I feel like I've just been like digging a bit, like, but I never allow myself to fully go.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which is all about control, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing I wanted to ask earlier with God. Something you said earlier in some videos not too long ago that I picked up. It's like I realized for the first time that I could communicate. Oh, sorry, communicate with God.
Yeah.
Like I could ask things, like generally kind of emanating it from my heart.
Yeah.
Like, because I'm really big mental guy, and sometimes I just concentrate on like dropping down here, and
Yeah.
then I ask something. And then I started having feelings, and sometimes I doubt and things like that. But
So asking God with your feelings.
asking God with my feelings,
Yeah.
and that helped me a lot. But I realized that like it's all emotional, and then I get like yes feelings when I'm really interested. Sometimes no feelings, and sometimes it's blank feelings.
Yeah, yeah.
And when it's blank feelings, like I've realized lately, I can ask, like, is it because I don't want to know?
Yeah.
And then I get
And
a
then it's a yes.
But then after that, I was going to ask about it, but I listen to you often, and I get my own answers as I'm ready to ask you questions, and then sometimes I get the answer, and then
Yeah.
it's all emotional. I don't want to feel all these fears that are coming with the answer.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So fear is one thing that the majority of you are going to have to learn how to experience. And fear, and particularly terror, which is a sort of a real depth of fear, isn't it? That is something that most people on earth are unable to cope with at all.
Or
Like,
they believe they're unable
They
to.
believe they're unable to cope with it at all. And in fact, most people, when they get to a level of terror, they will always revert to violent rage. And that's women and men, by the way. So, no, terror is an emotion that most people are not able to handle, but it is eventually an emotion you'll be able to all handle. And once you can handle that, you'll find you can handle anything.
Thank you. And I just want to add that one thing quickly, and I think I don't know if I think it can help other people, because I've been listening to Divine Truth for 3 years, and I have a strong analytical mind, and I've always been trying to look for flaws. And
Yeah, I need to stop you now.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
let's go to Teddy. Yep. Now you're in an addiction, so you've got to stop. Yep.
So my question is, and I'm realizing how much I'm controlling my emotions and teaching people to control theirs.
Yep.
Dealing with animals or dealing with dangerous situations, like for example, like an EMT, someone who has to show up to an accident.
Yep.
Don't they have to kind of shut down their emotions in order to help that? My example, I guess, is I was in a situation with a dog that if I would have showed, animals respond to fear. They want to attack you under fear. When you're not afraid, they don't want to attack you. It actually stops them. So I had to shut down a lot of my fear. Basically, my question is, should I just allow myself to be mauled and destroyed at that moment? Or because if I didn't shut down my fear...
Can I say, you say.
No, Mary
say.
can say. Mary.
Well, let's see.
Let's see how Mary
Yeah,
goes.
see how Mary goes. I put to you that if you had really owned your fear, not projected it at the dog. So let's say there's 3 states. You talked about completely shutting down. And with really, you had to sort of absent yourself from yourself.
Yeah.
Well, how much fear that
Yeah.
the fear of dying. The fear of dying.
Yes, but that in effect, you're absenting yourself almost from yourself.
Yeah,
right?
completely stepping out of your body almost.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the dog didn't feel you anymore almost.
No, that's why it didn't respond.
Yeah. But if the confusion comes because most people don't feel their fear.
Yep.
So most people say, oh, I'm afraid, but they're not feeling it. They're projecting it. All the dog feels is fear then.
Yeah, which is a withdrawal of love from the dog's perspective.
And actually it makes dogs quite afraid, which is why they attack, because they're just reflecting humans' emotions, which is if I'm terrified, I should attack.
Yeah.
And so that's what dogs do when you project your fear.
Yeah.
So I put you there's a third alternative, which is just to really have your fear in that moment, which is a very humble
Fully.
state. Just fully allow it to overwhelm you.
Yeah.
And the dog wouldn't feel
Dog
it
will
from
leave
you.
you alone. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this was mid-attack, though. Like, I didn't feel the fear until I was being attacked.
But
Yeah.
I'm saying you didn't feel the fear.
At all.
Yeah. Yeah.
I definitely felt some fear, but I pushed a lot of it down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which means you stored it.
Yeah.
Yes, I 100% sure.
Which is still in you then.
100%. It is, because ever since that incident,
Yeah.
I've felt a lot more fear that I haven't fully been able to release yet.
Yeah.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the
Stirred
danger
up
of
your
doing
fear.
it. What Mary's suggesting is correct. If you fully feel your fear in the moment, the dog will just leave you alone. And in fact, most people will leave you alone too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what about the analogy what I was saying, where like an EMT, someone who shows up and someone is really...
Well, if
don't
you're
they-
going to be an EMT, my suggestion is fully feel all of your fears
Deal with
before
your
you
fear.
do be an EMT.
I
Yeah.
got you.
Like, and a lot of EMTs will tell you they're not actually terrified when they find someone who's had a heart attack.
That's
They're
Aren't
like,
they desensitized, though?
well,
no, well,
not necessarily, because there's somebody else's physical illness that they're dealing with. It just depends
it's not
on the
theirs.
person.
So oftentimes
Yeah.
the person only gets really afraid when it's theirs.
Or if it's
You know,
their
so,
mother or their partner. who's
then they
had-
get afraid.
Then they might be afraid.
This is why
Then-
a doctor won't be allowed to operate on their child or something like
Yeah.
that generally.
Yeah. Which is for good reason if you think about it,
yeah.
because then there's all
Because there's
that
a lot of fear involved. And
Yeah.
so they won't.
But some people do enter those professions, like police officers, EMTs, because they are full of fear. Martial arts instructors, like a lot of these kind of people who go into
martial arts all about fear.
Yeah, and a lot of people become these roles because they want to overcome their fear, and yeah, that's really damaging.
Yeah.
It's really damaging to the people they're dealing with. It's damaging to them. So the ethical way to do it is deal with your fear.
Yep.
And then you'll be great.
Yeah, but see, most people haven't learned how to fully experience their fear in the moment. So the reason why then it becomes dangerous is because the people around you all feel you denying fear as a withdrawal of love. So there's no longer any love in the situation anymore. And now if it's an animal, it's going to respond to the lack of love. And depending on how unsafe it feels
Yeah.
will depend on how it responds. So if you fully engage your fear completely and just feel it, the animal won't feel any of your fear. But if you only feel a bit of it and then suppress it, the animal will feel a large amount of that fear still. And the only reason why it doesn't respond when you suppress it, because you have to suppress it using anger or another response generally, and that's what it's feeling. That if it attacks you, it might get harmed, and that's why it stops attacking. But the best course of action is to feel it in the moment. Hard to say because...
Easy to say, hard
Easy
to
to say, hard to do. And the reason why it's so hard to do is the majority of us are so used to avoiding terrifying situations in any way we possibly can. Yeah. And so we don't understand how to feel them. In the first century, I had many terrifying situations and none of them bothered me too much. And to the point like where I was tortured many times, and when I was a child and also as an adult, and all of those situations were all able to be coped with because I didn't have a lot of fear about my death or fear about my life being taken or fear about the pain. At one point when I was about 19, I had a spear put through my, hip and broken back, dragged behind a horse all through the town over burning fire and everything. It took me 7 years to recover. I had from these injuries that I had, but I knew what was happening. I didn't have a lot of fear about it, and so my body could also recover from those things. So by the time I met Mary, I looked normal again. But actually, some dogs ate part of my face, and I was a big mess, when I was 19. Yeah. So these kind of things can all change if you deal with the different emotions in the moment. Yeah. But it is difficult, and particularly when you're coming from a position of sin, it's difficult because the sin is saying, be afraid, be afraid, be afraid, be angry, do something different, And so it is more difficult, and you're going to have to learn how to do it. And this is about your ability to expand in your emotional capacity to experience. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. So up the back. And down here to Mandy on this side. Jill, come down here, wherever that mic is on this side. Yeah, just behind.
So we talked about not being a hypocrite and being a model for your children to be
Yep.
able to feel things.
Yep.
But what about for a partner or a parent who was raised by parents who suppressed all of their emotions, suppressed their kids' emotions? So now you're trying to, do you model for them too? Like, how do you encourage them to do it? Because, yeah.
Well, firstly, you've got to understand, that you've got to have a good, strong look at your desire to encourage somebody else to feel their feelings. Oftentimes, that desire to encourage them, as we call it, is actually selfish. You want something from it, some level of safety or security about you doing it, or you want some other things from it, like you want some personal things from it. So the very first thing you got to do is look at what's your motive. Is your motive selfish, or is it?
Well, specifically, I'll say with my dad, he's
Yep.
going through cancer right now. He's very sick.
Yeah.
And I know that it's emotional.
Yep.
And I have even an awareness of what some of those emotions are. And I've tried to be brave, and I've tried to,
Yep.
explain that to him from whatever little perspective I have.
Yeah. Does he want to hear?
Kind of. He was more actually open than I thought he would be. He was less aggressive than I thought he would be.
Yep.
But my only motivation is that he can help to heal himself.
No, it's not. Your emotion is right now.
Yeah.
That's your motive. What's your real
Because I
motive?
feel like I can't heal him.
No, that's not it. What is your real motive? You can feel it. I can feel it from you. You can feel it.
I don't know.
You're afraid of him dying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's your motive. It's selfish. Sorry to say,
That's true.
Yeah. So that's going to make it a lot harder to help somebody. You're worried about him dying because of what he means to you and what he's done for you. And in fact, part of his cancer is because of what he's done for you, actually. A lot of people with cancer do things out of guilt on their part and to get things from their children or from other people. And as a result, the children or the other people continue to expect those things from that person. And the person, of course, is unwilling to give it up because of what they themselves want out of it. So, yeah, cancer has a dynamic where it's not just the person with cancer that is participant in the sin, but also every person around them participates in their sin.
Now, just because Jesus said it's selfish doesn't mean you should stop feeling it.
No.
Because actually you need to feel
You
it.
need to go through this grief
Yeah.
and not project it on your dad.
Yeah. Because
You
actually...
see, if you project it on your dad, if he does pass, he's going to find his life in the spirit world really difficult initially because he's going to always be coming back to you. Always be, he won't learn why he had the cancer. He'll just keep coming back to you and acting in the same emotion that caused his cancer in the first place. So it's not going to be good for him if you're projecting this grief onto him. And if your motive for talking to him about it is to stop him from dying, right, then the reality is the person with cancer wants to die. They're prepared to die in order to avoid an emotion inside of themselves. And they are willing to die rather than feel, actually. So when you project at him, don't die, don't die, don't die, he's going like he would rather die than feel something, and you're projecting at him the very feelings he wants from you so that he doesn't have to feel some things. So actually it can cause the person with cancer to last longer on earth with their cancer and then pass in even more pain than they would have otherwise.
So how does that person, like you're saying, he'd rather die than feel those emotions, which I think is totally accurate.
Yeah.
But how does he feel those emotions if no one's helping him?
Well, he doesn't want to.
But how does he get to a point of wanting to?
Well, he's going to have to work through that himself. There's nothing you can do to help him to get to a point where he wants to. That's his problem, is he wants you to do that.
Yeah. The best thing that you can do to help in that process is to not meet your addictions with him.
Or his addictions with you.
Or his addictions with you.
Yeah.
Because there's addictive processes that he's engaged for a lot of his life to avoid feeling.
Yep.
And now that's getting harder and harder, and now he'd prefer to die than feel them.
Yep.
And the difficulty with cancer is that often cancer creates all these big fears and worries and pain and suffering for the person, but fears and worries and grief in the people around them, and it causes the people
which the person who has the cancer likes.
Yeah, that it helps to meet the very addictions that were waning, if you like, in their life.
Yep.
And so you get drawn back into meeting the addictions, which actually worsens the person's condition.
And they last longer on earth as a result, in more pain and suffering when they pass.
Yeah.
But didn't you say before that it's the loving thing to do to point out the sin in someone else?
Only if they want to hear it.
Yeah.
You see, in an environment here where I'm here, this is my space. You're in my space. I hired this hall. This is my space. I'm responsible for this space. When you visit your father's home, he's responsible for his space, not you. And unless he's inviting you to engage in the process of understanding, then really to share with him would be really against his will. See, I'm assuming you coming into my space, I've made it very clear to all of you that we're going to talk about a certain set of things, right? And you're coming into my space. This is what we're talking about. And you can leave or stay. That's your choice, right? You can stay under the guidelines of my rules, right? Which are you need to be kind, considerate, ask questions freely like a child would, not project at me, and so forth. That's my rules. And if you don't abide by my rules, then you can leave. Right? But when it comes to you going into somebody else's space, so if my father was staying with me and expected me to look after him, now I'm talking to him. But if my father is by himself or in a hospice or some other place and he's not being cared for by me and he's not forcing himself upon my space, then I have no right really to talk to him. I can raise the issue just kindly, but anything further than that, I'm breaking his will.
But it's interesting what you're saying, because you're sort of saying, I want to show him, or tell him what the sin is, but you're still engaged in the sin with him.
That's right. You're engaged in your part of it.
My job is to not support any of your sin, whether I'm in your house or not. Like, so if I'm in your house, I'm sinning if I support your sin.
Correct.
So
it would be unwise for me still to say that to you.
I don't have to say anything.
I don't have to say anything.
It's more important that I don't support your sin through my feelings, through my actions. And so this is where it gets tricky when people hear divine truth, because they're like, well, I've got to tell everyone everything, but they're still engaged in the sin, rather than saying, I've got to deal with my sin so that I don't support sin in myself or anybody else. And then there will be opportunities and there will be occasions where it's perfectly loving to speak about what's going on.
Yep.
But if I'm speaking about it while still supporting the sin in myself or another person, I may as well not speak anyway, because it's going to have no effect, apart from making things confusing and angry sometimes.
So what is the sin that I'm supporting?
No, just saying a sec. Before you continue, you also don't understand that when you're in an environment where there's a person in front of you and they're in distress of some kind, but it's caused by their own addictions and desires, obviously if I speak the truth to them, I've got to be very careful that I'm not motivated by lies in myself.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the lie in yourself is, I don't want to feel my grief, Dad. I don't want you to die. So if you were being truthful with your dad, you would have to say, Dad, I don't want you to die. You know, that's the truth. You really couldn't go much further than that and you said, Dad, I think I know the reason why you're dying. Do you want to do something about it? Right? That's about as far as you could go.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah.
Now, what was your question? Sorry.
No, I guess you just answered it. I said, what is the sin that I'm engaging in?
That's right.
Well, it's that, and also the codependence between you and your dad.
Yeah. Which is actually breaking your soulmate bond actually too.
Yeah.
You understand what I mean by that?
Sure do.
You have a stronger relationship with your father than with any other man, right?
My husband would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's not good, is it?
Nope.
No. So basically that's what I'd call an emotionally incestuous relationship with your father. Yep. And those kind of relationships are very damaging and cause disease actually frequently. And they're very damaging in your relationship with a partner too, because the partner's always going to feel like he's second man. right? And the issue is with the soulmate bond or even partnership, unless this person is the most important person in my life, I shouldn't be with them, right? You know, and many of us don't realise how attached we are to our mums and dads until they die, and then we have huge grief that comes up at their death, and often that grief is much higher than the grief of the death of a partner. Yeah. And that's all indicative of there being a codependent addiction with the opposite gender parent. And it's frequent that boys have this with their mothers and girls with their fathers.
So where do you even start to break that?
Well, that's going to require you working through and healing what we call the intergender emotional injuries that a person has. And one of those injuries obviously affecting you is you feel that your dad passing affects your safety and security in some way, right? Your emotional safety and security in some way, and your dependency upon him for approval from him. And so your definition as a woman is very much defined by how much your dad approves of you and how much he cares about you, right? And it's not dependent on that actually, but that's how you feel. Does that make sense? And so these are the things to start working through that will help him, and it will also help him when he passes. Because when at the moment, if he passes, he's going to feel he'll still continue to want this relationship with his daughter, even though he's in the spirit world. And as a result, the very emotional injury that caused his cancer will continue after he passes. So he will still have a degradation in those areas of his body. You know where his cancer began, right? Where did it begin?
His colon.
Yep. What's that about? For your dad, what's that about? Colon, about?
I think it's anger, but I don't know.
Well, worth. It's about getting his worth. So he's getting his worth by doing things for people. He's getting his worth, right? And that's how he got to be viewed by everybody as a great guy.
Yep.
Yeah, but actually from God's perspective, he hasn't done it from the right motive. And so from God's perspective, he hasn't learnt how to be a great guy yet, right? Even though you think he is a great guy. Yeah. And because he's done things for you and other people, all of you love him, right? You're all terribly upset about him getting cancer, but actually it's been caused by his own desire to feed this addiction through actions taken, giving his energy to everybody, right, in order to get some worth for himself. Colon is his bowel.
Where your poo comes out.
Where your poo comes out, yep. That makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. So I hope what I've said hasn't offended you too much, because, what I'm saying is like definite, but every one of God's principles governing the operation of the soul, whenever you shut down emotions in a certain way, disease is the subsequent result, right? So all cancers actually are completely curable as long as the person dealt with the controlling emotion, controlling the emotion they're trying to control using addiction to control it. As long as they deal with that, curable, every single one, curable. Your body has been designed to cure itself by God. And so when it doesn't, it's because of an intention that you are engaged in yourself. If that makes sense to everyone? You've got to remember, God's perfect. He designed a perfect body. He didn't design it to fail. He designed it to succeed. He designed it to work. He designed it not to get disease. The first human couple lived nearly 1,000 years and they never had a disease. Right? God designed it to be perfect. Any imperfection that arises in your body is the result of either your own sin or the sin of someone else generationally that's been passed down to you. It's one of those two things. So the key is to deal with whatever those sins are, if possible. Now, in some cases, for some people, it's not possible until they pass because they've been had a genetic deformity, for example, that now is imposed upon their life while they're here on earth. Some have had some mental disability where they can't engage a process anymore because of the damage that comes from their forebears. They have, some kind of mental disturbance that causes them not to be able to be conscious of their choices and decisions so much. Even though that is the case, you can often help them, but those people will be cured when they pass. For the most part, if it's a generational deformity passed upon them, they'll be cured instantly, usually through a process that goes on in the spirit world in the first sphere. They are cured of any passed down genetic problems, and then what they're left with is their true emotional condition, right? But for the majority of us who are aware and intellectually able and are able to not control our emotion if we so choose, we need to make the decision ourselves. Yeah. Yep. But can you see disease? Consequence is trying to control specific emotion.
The cause.
The cause is trying to control specific emotion. The consequence, the disease. You try to control a specific type of emotion, the disease will appear in a specific place. The type of disease will depend upon the type of way in which you're trying to control the emotion. Like, so say a person gets a brain tumour, they're trying to control through their thoughts. If they get a problem in their lungs, they're trying to control through their grief. If they get a problem in their heart, they're trying to control probably grief through, with regard to love, the romantic love usually, or sometimes love of a parent, but most time romantic love. If they have a problem in their kidneys or their liver, it's going to be usually some kind of spirit-based attachment based upon history about what the person's trying to avoid with anger or rage. And every one of them is traceable. And every one of them, if a person has exactly the same problem, it's exactly the same cause. This is the beauty of law, is that this is what happens when it's broken. You get exactly the same effect. Yeah. So this is very important to understand. Yeah. Thanks.
On that, what would ALS be? What emotion of suppression would that
Yep.
be? And is that genetic?
Yeah, what we need to do is define ALS for most people, I suppose, because
It's called different things.
It's called different things in different countries, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lou
Lou
Gehrig's?
Gehrig's. Yeah. So that's a gradual wasting of your physical.
Body, muscular system.
Eventually, it shuts down your respiratory system, isn't it? And that's the way that a person passes. But
Yep.
it's similar to MS in some ways. I don't think causally, but in presentation.
Yep.
In that we get a
Now, what's her name in Sweden had ALS, didn't she?
Yes, she did.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. It's got a specific cause. You're asking what it is?
I'm asking sort of what emotion suppression would
Yep.
cause that one.
It's about being injured in some way emotionally, and instead of feeling the injury as grief, feeling it as rage.
and not expressing
And suppressing the rage.
Yeah, not expressing.
Not
that
expressing
rage.
the rage.
Yeah. So it's actually an angry withdrawal from life.
Yeah.
But a slow process.
Yep.
Yeah.
Make sense? Yep. Sarah?
Could somebody heal ALS through
When you say could somebody, you mean the person?
the person who has
Certainly
ALS
the person could, yes.
by expressing their rage?
Yes.
And ultimately, their grief.
Yes,
Like it's going to be a process.
The problem
you
with
know,
some of
it's
these
not just-
motor neuron, though, is if you don't do it soon enough,
Yeah.
the mylar starts stripping off of your brain and all sorts of things start happening. And
very hard.
and now it's very hard to recover from some of those things. Right? You have to have a really good diet and other things like that in order to recover. And even then, there won't probably be a full recovery because some diseases like that, which are caused by some intense emotions, have the effect that you've stripped off certain functions of your brain and everything. And after a while, it sort of learns that that's what it's going to stay doing. And so it can recover, but to heal it properly would require someone with God to heal it probably, along with the person's
Sincere desire.
sincere desire,
Yeah.
obviously to feel their rage. Unless they choose to feel their rage, nobody on earth or in the spirit world can heal them. Not who is in alignment with God anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
Yeah. And then Timo.
And then down.
Yeah.
And what about the prostate cancer? And
What do you reckon? What do you reckon it might be? Sexual organs relating to cancer, what do you think it might be?
well, something relates to the expression of masculinity, or something against, or even something with the other gender, especially the mother.
With the opposite gender, yes?
Yeah.
Yep. So what would it be? It's really using sexual feelings to gain feelings from the opposite gender and pandering to the opposite gender in order to gain those feelings.
That's the sin.
That's the sin. Yeah. So
engaging sexually so as to avoid certain feelings with women,
yeah.
or sort of putting yourself last in preference of the woman's desires and feelings
Yep.
in order to get feelings from a woman.
In order to get sexual feelings from the woman.
Approval, like something like approval.
Well, sexual approval and sexual desire, yeah, from the woman, yeah. Yep. Highly likely the woman isn't giving it in the relationship as well. Well, like I said, most cancers involve the two people or more. Yep. Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Now, I don't want this to be an answering session
now
of
it's
all
just
your
pop
diseases.
quiz. Yeah. Is that what it is, Tim?
Is that what it is?
You got one.
Well, yeah, let's go. One more.
Bladder cancer.
Bladder function?
Bladder cancer.
Bladder cancer, yes.
Maybe just talk about the dynamic of cancer, because that's common to all cancers.
Yeah, common to all cancers, there's a dynamic. So the dynamic is that you want a specific emotion from other people and you're willing to work hard in a certain way to get it from the other person so that you don't have to feel the opposite emotion yourself. So
often involves sacrifice of self, working very hard in certain areas in order to try to get this feeling from other people, and a huge resistance to giving up working for others, doing this addiction for others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's mainly based on their partner, that person, or would it
well,
be
there's usually a history with the opposite gender parent or the same gender parent. It depends what kind of cancer it is as to which gender you're doing the work with, which gender you're mostly interested in. So an example of that is for a woman who has breast cancer in the left breast, it's going to be about her relationship with her mother initially and what she does with women. But if she gets cancer first in her right breast, then it's going to be related to what she does with her father and what she does with men in order to get a feeling of love from
Being
them.
loved.
Being loved. Yeah. In the case of breast, it's about being loved. So often a woman will work hard for everyone in their family, but specifically for one gender in order to have a feeling of being loved, and that will cause breast cancer. And whatever the gender is will determine whether it's left or right breast. So every cancer has a cause that is traceable to an emotion, and every cancer has an emotion where you're wanting something from the person, and instead of just saying it outright to them, I want this from you, you do a whole heap of things to get it. Yeah. You understand? So like, let's say if I want sex from Mary, I could just go up to Mary and say, I want sex, darling, can you give me some? Couldn't I? But see, most of us are not brave enough to say things like that, right? So and also, what if you get a knockback, right? Then
you might have to feel.
You might have to feel. So what you do instead is you bring her flowers and you cook her a meal and you do you understand?
Fix the car.
You fix the car, and she asks you to fix the roof, and so you get up on the roof and fix the roof, and she says my stove isn't working, get a new one. Yes, I get you a new one, and right, but it's all done because I just want sex. Do you know what I mean? And this is what drives many relationships, right? And so I do all of those things, and she's going, oh, he's wonderful, he does whatever I want. I'll give him some sex now. right? So it requires two of us participating in the dynamic. Obviously, Mary would feel herself in that place to sort of be in a position of power, and I'm sort of being subservient, but I'm doing it in a very sneaky way. And it's all for me, really, so that I get some sex sooner or later, right? So it's really just for me anyway. And this is the trouble with a lot of cancers, is this is why there's so much body response to it, because it is an unloving emotion driving the cancer, and therefore it's going to be affecting your own body, because of it being an unloving emotion for you. So every cancer has this dynamic, and so rather than talking about sort of where it appears, because obviously where it appears is going to have a specific way in which you are attempting to get that approval or acceptance or love, or, chest, love, bowel, worth. What do you reckon bladder might be? Sexual worth. So just depending on where it is in your body, head, using your mind to get these things. Some people get cancers in their legs. That's a lot about running around and doing things for people, but being angry about it the entire time. Yeah. But having to do it because it makes you feel good about yourself when you get the approval and things like that. So it just depends very much upon the location in your body as to where the cancer will first appear. Then obviously with cancer, the trouble is, it's your body eating away at itself, causing your own death. And so fundamentally, you would rather die than deal with the emotion.
Then give up the addiction.
In other words, rather die than feel the causal emotion, right? So everyone with cancer has this general feeling they'd rather die than deal with that emotion. That emotion to them is worse than death, right? Now, if it's in the cervix, and obviously it's another sexually related one, right? And so I won't go into all the details because it's just like, you can get cancer pretty much in any part of your body, right? But it just depends upon where it started, but the emotion is just the same. You want to do something in order to get something for yourself, and in the process, you're sort of manipulating people around you to give you the thing that you're unwilling to go through, the feeling that you don't have.
Yeah, and very unwilling to ask for.
And very unwilling to ask for even.
Yeah.
Very unwilling to even just have a conversation about it. Yeah. Most people with cancer won't even have the conversation. They'll die rather than have a conversation. That's how strong the emotion is. Yeah. But getting back to this, again, all about controlling, in the case of cancer, one specific emotion. But as you control it in your soul, what happens in your soul? Your soul envelops your two bodies. And of course, when an emotion is blocked in a specific area of your soul, that blockage will relate to specific areas of your body. So if you're, let's say, with a person with bowel cancer, they will have a blockage of worth. They want worth from someone else. They're not prepared to let go of the reason why they don't have any worth, and they're not prepared to feel they don't have worth. They're not prepared to go through those emotions. They'd rather die than feel those emotions. So that causes a blockage in the area of the soul that controls the energy systems of the spirit body in that location of the bowel. And then what happens is the bowel then starts decaying because it hasn't got enough energy to maintain and restore itself. You all know that your body replaces its cells every 7 years, right? Every cell in your body completely different in 7 years' time. And many cells in your body get replaced within weeks. So skin, for example, within weeks. Some organs, softer tissue organs generally, within weeks, the cells will replace. And this process is interfered with by the blockage of emotion in the soul. So what happens is when there's a blockage in the soul, there's a certain location that is connected to the energy system in your soul, supplies energy to your body. So if that energy is coming into your bowel region to supply energy to that bowel region, and you've blocked off the emotion, you've stopped the emotion from flowing in that region, then now naturally that area of your body can no longer sustain itself without that energy. So it's going to begin decaying. Now, how it decays depends on what type of emotional injury you're suppressing. Cancers are all about eating away yourself, right? Overdoing things for yourself in order to get something from someone else, right? So that's the underlying reason for the body eating away itself. Other diseases depend on what kind of emotion and what kind of effect you want with that emotion, like what kind of thing you're trying to achieve. We know one lady, she passed now.
I don't know who you're referring to, sorry.
In Sweden, the lady.
Yes,
she's
yeah,
passed,
yeah.
hasn't she? We met her. She told us through she was wheelchair. She had ALS, wheelchair bound, had to be fed, manoeuvred everywhere. But she had one of those typewriters where you could with a mouth, and she told us what process began her rage, and what it was her partner cheated on her and lied about it to her.
Well, I think he had done it repetitively,
and he'd done it
her.
repetitively, and eventually he told her, and then he told her that he'd done it many, many times, and she became so enraged by it, but she wouldn't feel her rage. She refused to feel how angry she was about it. She didn't want to leave him either. She instead wanted to punish him. And her rage caused her to get into this state. And within 2 months after that event, she had ALS. In 2 months, she's now passed. We've talked to her since she passed, and she's starting to understand the reasons why she had it and things like that. We tried to talk to her at the time, but of course she didn't understand what we were even saying about it. She was in such a rage about what he'd done. And the irony was, he looked after her to her death, but he still cheated on her very regularly all the way through the whole thing. Yeah. So the very thing that she was avoiding her rage from, she attracted every single week. There was another carer come in, he'd have sex with her. Another carer come in, he'd have sex with her. And yeah. Right? And her rage just built and built and built and built, naturally, but she still was not willing to express it. Even in her wheelchair, unwilling to express it. Yeah. Make sense? Yeah. So, these are things that happen when you control emotion. Very dangerous. To your life, to your body, to your future, to your, future existence in terms of your spiritual development and your emotional development, just dangerous on almost every level. Yeah.
Now, Mandy had a question here.
Oh, that's right. Mandy was next, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. I actually had 2 things, and it's about kids. The first one is when your child is like angry and blaming you or blaming people for little things. I struggle with holding up the law with that behavior. And what does that look like to restrict that unloving behavior?
Well, it depends whether the thing they're blaming you for you actually did or not, doesn't it? To a degree.
Just getting angry about everything,
Yeah, but normally a child doesn't get angry about everything unless they're angry about something in particular that they're unwilling to express, right?
So either you've got a child who feels very entitled, or you've got a child who's very angry about something else that she's
That's
not
what I'm trying to figure out, which one it is, to see what my job is.
How did you bring her up?
How did I bring her up?
Yeah, did you, every time she wanted something, did you give it?
Yes, mostly.
Okay, so mostly entitled?
And her dad and her grandparents were
did that as well?
Yeah.
Yep, so entitled,
That's
definitely.
what I'm feeling like.
Yep. So now whenever she doesn't get anything she wants, she's going to be angry.
Yep.
How do you stop that?
It gets pretty out of control.
When you say out of control, what happens?
Just wild, physically violent.
Violent, wild?
Yeah, just yelling, screaming, just
throwing
uncontrollable,
things.
Yeah. Throwing things, yeah.
Okay. So also probably spirit overcloaked, right?
Yep.
Yep.
So I've tried physically restricting her, like you've talked about.
Pretty hard. How old is she?
Very difficult. She's 11.
Yeah. When they're 11, it's pretty hard. It's like
yeah,
almost like an adult body, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you'd have 2 or 3 people restricting her if you had to restrict her. Yeah. Difficult. You should have started earlier.
Yeah.
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 When they're like that, when they're 2, we have a young boy, Elias, his name is, who started that kind of manipulation with his parents because they allowed it. By the time he was 2, he was already boss of the whole family, and they started to do things when he was 2, and as a result, by the time he's now 3 and a bit, and already things are starting to calm down because it's being dealt with properly. When they're 11, it's been let go on a long time. Yeah.
But Mandy, can I just pick you up on something you said? You said you struggle to uphold the law in those cases.
Yeah.
I would look at what emotion
She's
am
working
I
on your
avoiding?
guilt, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yep.
that's what you're going to need to deal with in order to be effective.
Yep.
Is to deal with your investment in her liking you, I guess, in a very simple sense.
Yep.
And whatever that is about for you, there's going to be reasons in you why you find it hard to tolerate your daughter being unhappy with you.
Yeah.
But once you're over that, having a law which is just as much as possible in harmony with and reflecting God's attitude about these things, God's laws, which means that there's always a consequence to the unloving use of will, that is going to be the best thing for her, isn't it?
Yeah.
You want your
it's going
home.
to be a process of re-education.
Yeah.
She doesn't let me speak.
Well, you don't have to speak to have a consequence.
Okay, yeah.
In fact, if you feel
What do you mean
need,
she doesn't let you speak?
Well, like
You're the
every
parent,
every
like-
time I know, and that's why
What's
I
wrong with
feel
you?
like that's what I'm asking myself. What is wrong with me?
That's right.
Like,
Well, obviously, if you feel you can't speak to an 11-year-old, then obviously,
I start speaking and she starts screaming at me, or she'll cut me off, or like run into her room, slam her door so she can't hear me. That kind of thing.
yeah, no worries.
So I'm like, okay, she's not.
Well,
hearing
that child in my house, not getting any food, not getting any clothes, not getting
Yeah.
any phones, any TV, any nothing, till they learn to treat me well.
Me. Yeah,
Yeah, and if they're 11, I'd probably kick them outside.
that's what I've done. I'm like, okay, you're gonna be outside now because.
But I
of
wouldn't be
this.
giving them food or nothing.
And
They'd have to work
I was
for it.
giving her food, yeah, too.
Yeah, I wouldn't do any of that
Okay.
if it's that bad. But you got to have some compassion for the fact that you've let it get that bad
Yep.
too,
Yeah.
don't you? It's like
Yep.
that's letting it get way out of hand
Yep.
too long. And so look at the reason why you've waited so long to deal with that. And obviously she's getting supported by grandparents and dad, and that you need some strong discussions there with a concerted effort on the part of all of you to change this, because they're basically also taking on the role of her parenting. And so that if they're educating her to live this sort of way, that's very bad for her future. If she grows up to be this lawless, she's going to be a lawless member of society, and also from God's perspective, she's going to end up, even if she passed right now, in the hells.
Yeah.
And that's pretty unusual for a child. Yeah, but that's where she's going to end up. And she'll be isolated, and then there'll be a group of spirits working with her. If she passed right now, there would be a group of spirits restricting her every activity. Unless she had a loving desire, they wouldn't respond to anything she said or did.
Okay.
They would, if she became violent, they would actually bind her to stop her violence.
Okay.
Yep.
but yeah.
It begins with, if you start a lot earlier, obviously you don't need to do all those things, right?
And also, it's going to be so crucial now for you to deal with some feelings around this, to want God's attitude about these things, because otherwise you're getting undermined all the time, and you're letting it happen.
Yeah.
So there's got to be big emotional investments you
yourself.
have in either not having conflict with her, or maybe it's your husband, or maybe it's your in-laws, or
Maybe it's all of them.
or maybe it's all of them. But you're going to have some courage to have the conflicts with people, and you don't need to be very aware. Like, I see a lot of parents trying to convince their kids to be good when they're already very entitled, and it doesn't work. They just go, "Oh, I'm getting attention, whatever."
Yeah.
There has to be consequences, and you don't have to talk about it. If they come and want to know why there's the consequence, there's your opening, but that's them asking. If you've already tried to explain and there's no opening, well, now it's time for action.
Yeah. So you don't have to be violent back, but
No.
you do have to restrict their violence. And if that requires 2 of you holding her down while she wants to be violent, then you do that. Right? what else can you do? You've let it go too long, and there's not much else that can be done other than that. You know, a person can feel their emotions without being violent. So that's the first thing. Also, a person who is allowed to be, as a child, completely unrestricted is going to end up being spirit overcloaked at some point.
Yeah.
For sure. Because the spirits love a person who is uncontrolled and
well, they've got all these reasons. You live in the West. Wow. There's toys, there's diversion, there's all these things. A spirit, and
drugs,
there's no
alcohol,
rules.
all sorts of things.
There's no rules. So a spirit love that. You
Yeah.
know? And because the will of the child is so, what do you call that? Permissive. You know, they don't have any kind of morality internally growing within them.
No moral compass, no loving desire.
So the spirit is like, well, this is great. This kid will do anything.
Yeah.
I want to have some experiences. Here I go, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So very prone to spirit overcloaking as well. And, you know, that means you're not dealing physically just with your daughter either. You're dealing physically with the strength of a spirit who's with your daughter as well. And that often increases the muscular strength of the child. So it's going to require a concerted effort for more than just one person to deal with this. It's not going to be, if you let it go that long, when they're little, when they're 2 and 3, you can restrict them and the spirit leaves them pretty quickly usually. You know, we've had cases where spirits left them within 3 months, gone, and then you don't have to restrict a child anymore. And the child's more docile in the sense of not docile, because the idea isn't to make them docile with their will. The idea is just to get rid of the spirit who's causing their... So you get rid of the spirit. Now you can talk and reason with the child, and now it's a lot easier. And we've seen that happen with all of Eloise's children, pretty much, particularly her 2 boys. And they were so monstrously unruly that they were destroying the place, her house, and punching her and kicking her, and we'd be talking to her and they'd be screaming and yelling and hitting her, you know. And once you deal with it properly, if you met them now, you guys would not think that was their history.
Not at all.
They're very well behaved, easy to get along with. All of them, including the youngest is 12, he cooks for himself, cleans up himself, does his own shopping, does his own washing, does his own cleaning, looks after everything. He knows what he wants to be when he grows up.
They do very well in school.
He has arranged his own work experience outside of school with the people who, you know, he wants to be an engineer and he's worked out he can do that. He's done all that. He's 12. We now ask him to be a manager in God's way. He's 12.
Yeah.
One day he was managing some 70-year-olds and he was telling them, look, you got some emotional issues about intergender, emotional issues with your wife that you need to address because she's looking after you. And
they're pretty switched on kids' emotions.
but when he was 3, he was like, bedlam.
Yeah. Does your daughter have your build, Mandy, or Dad's?
Build?
Yeah.
Physical.
Physical, yeah.
Mine.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So she's not...
Slight.
She's
big
small.
girl.
Yep.
Yeah. And she's shortish too.
Yeah.
So,
So that's...
but it's difficult to...
It's going to take
restrict
2 of
myself.
them.
We started when she was like closer to like 7, I think, and she was still just too strong, even for 2
Yeah.
kids.
And there obviously wasn't consistency.
No, there wasn't.
No.
Exactly.
This is the issue.
No, you got to be really consistent.
Yeah.
And to break the hold of spirits on her, very consistent. Because if they know there's a little hole, they're going to use it.
Yeah.
Just by being consistent. There's a spirit who is restricted using the body of a person on earth doesn't like the restriction. So all you need to do is restrict them long enough for the spirit to leave. And once the spirit leaves, they won't come back because they know they're going to get restricted again. So they just go and try to find somebody else they can influence. Yeah. So yeah, consistency, you know, and it requires both parents, consistency. And if it sounds like you've got number of parents because you've got grandparents looking after and so forth.
It's mostly my husband and I, but yeah, we're not on the same page.
Yeah, so all need to be on the same page. It's very difficult if you're not.
Yeah.
Very difficult if you're not. Yeah.
Thanks.
You can do a like non-physical restriction, as in just restriction of the environment, if you like.
Yeah, so things
Equal
like
to
mobile phone, TV,
Yeah,
all
you
these other
know,
things.
all the addictions.
As
if
soon
you
as she
like.
enters
Yeah.
violence, though, what are you going to do? You're going to have
Yeah.
to do something.
There has to be some way to restrict her physically.
Physically.
Whether it's, you know,
these are
restricting her
things
access
that-
to you, if you like,
And
and the environment.
I must say that the things I'm recommending, you imagine how the media would take something like that, right?
Yeah, this weekend we're just like...
Yeah, and the reality is, some people we know have had the police call on them because other people have accused them, and when the police learnt that, oh, this is what we're doing, the police were going, oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Then they're not going to have to do it when they're 20, right? So a lot of times, the things you're afraid of happening won't happen. It's just, you know, when you explain it and you're not afraid and everything, and you're doing
people
it for
meet
a
the
reason.
kids. You know, people meet the kids and see that the kids are not traumatized. They're
Traumatized
actually doing well,
or
you know.
abused in any way physically.
Yeah.
So, you know, it all depends on intention, doesn't it, here as well?
And you being right in yourself, in your intention for doing it. You know, if you're coming from a place of anger or punishment or whatever, that's not going to...
Or blaming them for the situation they're now in, because really it's not, they're not to blame, right? A child who's been let go by the time of 11, that is a problem that began when she was born, right?
Yeah.
Not just 11. So it's basically not good. Remember that when you became a parent, you were just as old as she was as a child. Weren't you?
In parenthood.
In parenthood.
Yeah.
Right.
Most people are not educated to be a parent. So in other words, when your child was 1, you were a 1-year-old parent. Right? In other words, before your child was born, you knew nothing about parenting. Everybody thinks they know something, but they don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time your child's 1, you were 1-year-old parent as well. And when your child's 2, you're a 2-year-old parent. So you're still not a very, don't really know much about parenting yet, right? By the time you're 30, you might know, by the time the child's 30, you might know something about parenting, but it's not going to benefit the child. Right. Maybe another one if you had one, but not that one. And so the problem is that there's a terrible lack of education on earth about proper parenting. And most parenting on earth is unloving, right? And you can't punish yourself for it, but you got to correct it, right? You attack yourself for it, but you do need to correct it. You need to take different action. And a lot of times the action needing to be taken is going to trigger you emotionally because there's guilt and shame and all sorts of feelings. And then other people look at you strange, like, what are you doing with the child? I remember one child came to a seminar. He was about 2.5 years old and he was screaming all the time. And Mum came up to us and said, what do I do about this child? Like, this child's screaming at... So I grabbed the child, sat down with it like this, wrapped my hand around the child. Within 2 minutes, well, it was probably less than 2 minutes, it was yelling and screaming and kicking and bashing its head against me and all sorts of things, right? And I said, this is what you do with a child. She bore it for 2 more minutes. And then she took the child from me and never saw me again. Because she couldn't bear putting that kind of restriction on her own child who was unruly. Right? Yeah.
Thanks.
And that's fine, like, if that's what... But I bet you now that child would be, I don't know, in its teenage years, it's going to be a pretty monstrous kid. Yeah. He was headed that way at 2.5 because of what he was allowed to do. He was allowed to punch his mum, kick her. How's he going to treat women when he's an adult? Right? It's going to be pretty bad. And we've seen children like that grow up over 10, 15 years. You know, we've been teaching Divine Truth publicly now for me, I started in 2008, it's now 16 years. And in that time, I've seen children like just born grow to be nearly adults, right? And you see the results of it all. And many parents come back to us 16 years later and say, I just regret I didn't take your advice back then, you know? Yep. Because they didn't want to, or they felt it was wrong. But this is the way God acts with us, right? This is why we have laws, because there's penalties of laws, so we learn. And it's very important for your children that they learn that there is authority that is loving and caring, but it's for their own good, because otherwise they can get overcloaked by spirits, damaged by others. You imagine a child who's this demanding and angry, she goes to the workforce. Is she going to be employable? The instant the boss asks her to do something she doesn't want to do, she will have a kick and scream, right? Right? And what is he going to do? Fire her on the spot, probably, right? And so they're not even going to be able to care for themselves.
Hopefully he does. Sadly, the workforce is not going that well, is it?
No, for the same reasons, right?
Yeah, and
everybody's going, aren't you good, you did that, and aren't you good, you did that, and nobody's getting anything done, right? Because they're all just virtue signalling everybody how good they are, doing things that they're not actually finishing or completing anymore. And this is why we're ending up with things being manufactured now that are crap, that you buy them and you use them once and you might as well chuck it away, because nobody's thinking about anything anymore. They're all just virtue signaling everybody. I worry for the world coming up, because these young people who have had permissive upbringings, emotionally permissive upbringings where they're allowed to control their entire family, what do you think they're going to do when they get control of the world? It's going to be very interesting. So this is why we need to change our parenting on earth.
And the best way, for those of you who aren't parents yet, there's a few, maybe, not many, but, get God's law, love God's law. Because when you love God's law, when you really, love the way that God has designed everything, you're going to feel drawn to create this law in your own home. And it'll be so good for your kids.
Yeah.
So amazing. They'll understand that authority can be loving, not punitive, and that it can create freedom. Laws can actually create more freedom and more happiness.
But also, what's free for your child must also be free for you as an adult, and must also be free for other children. So if your life is a nightmare because your child has been given freedom, then that's not real freedom.
Well, and I would say your child is not free. She's a slave to her demands.
Yeah.
She's
slave
not
to her
free.
addictions. Yeah.
She can't create for herself. She can't care for herself. She's a slave to needing other people to do all that for her. So she's not free. The kids that we were talking about before, who can get themselves up for school, iron their uniform if they need to, make their lunch, make their breakfast, come home, make their dinner, do the homework, go to bed, and mum doesn't need to be involved in any little part of it. Yeah. That's pretty free.
And the average mum who hears that goes, what, they're doing all of that? What's the role of the mum? Well, the role of your mother is not to be a mother, because you're not their mother. You are their teacher. God is their mother. So teach them what God would teach them. That's your role. And so, that's what we need to learn how to do as parents. We need to learn how to be loving parents who will teach the child, as much as we're able, teach the child what the child will need to learn in their relationship with God anyway. Yeah. That would be the best course of action. So that's what we need to do for our children. And if we do that, our children will grow up being self-responsible members of society who love other people, not just themselves, and who care for everyone in society, and who are thorough, and they are scientifically and emotionally capable people of living a life that is productive for the rest of the society as well as for themselves. Yeah. That's how they'll grow up. Yeah. But that requires some major changes in parenting. If we're just parenting because we want to look like we're a good mum, which is, or a good dad, and being so permissive because we had a lot of things happen in our own childhood that we don't want to have happen in theirs, and we get so permissive under those circumstances, then what will end up happening is the child will use that and abuse that and get to a stage to be a monster in their life, in their future, one way or the other.
And they're going to struggle. They're going to struggle to make decisions, have relationships, just feel good about themselves ultimately, because they're so dependent on everyone else propping them up.
Yeah. So these are necessary changes that need to be made, but you can feel, can't you, that if the average person heard this, they'd be in an uproar, like, how dare they suggest this? And, how dare they suggest a child be self-sufficient by the time he's 3,
How that's abuse. Yeah.
No, it isn't it. You imagine the pride the child is going to have in itself, being self-sufficient in the sense of sort of emotionally self-sufficient by the time of 3 or 4, and then physically self-sufficient by 7, like where they're earning their own money and everything by the time that state is happening. You imagine how, when they're an adult, how they're going to cope with life. They're going to find life under all circumstances, no matter how tough it is externally, they're going to find it easy because they have that self-confidence and self-awareness that comes from understanding these things, right? Yeah. But what I would like, many of you are dying to do a wee now, but so we need to just have a short break, and then I'd just like to have a brief discussion about awakening. Can we do that? Yes. Yep. Good day.